The bell above the cafe door jingled, its chime swallowed by the hum of conversations, the hiss of milk steamers, and the clatter of cups against saucers. It was 8:03 a.m., the hour when every office worker in the small city of Mapleview seemed to rush in for caffeine before facing the gray October drizzle outside. Maya flicked a stray strand of hair from her eyes and forced a smile that didn't reach her heart. She'd been on her feet since dawn, and the ache in her ankles was a dull, familiar drumbeat. The cafe was short-staffed again. Sophie had called in sick, leaving Maya to handle both the counter and the tables. She moved quickly between booths, her dark ponytail swinging, apron streaked faintly with coffee. Her mind wasn't in the room. It was on the rent due in 4 days, on her mother's medical bills waiting in an envelope at home, and on the tiny dream she kept buried beneath exhaustion. That one day she'd open her own cafe, one where everyone, rich or poor, would be welcome. But this morning that dream felt like a cruel joke. The manager's voice cut through the noise. "Maya, focus. We've got a full house." She nodded, swallowing her irritation. Then, as if on cue, the doorbell jingled again. A gust of cold air swept in, carrying the sharp scent of rain and something else. Faint, metallic, almost like rust. Heads turned, and the conversations stuttered for a heartbeat. A man had entered. He was tall, though his shoulders hunched as if to make himself smaller. His coat, if it could still be called that, was torn at the sleeves, its color indeterminate from grime. His beard was patchy, gray streaks running through it, and his hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the backpack slung over one shoulder. A homeless man. He hesitated by the door, eyes flicking around the cafe, searching for an empty corner. A murmur rippled through the crowd. One woman pulled her purse closer. A man at the counter frowned, then buried his face back in his newspaper. Maya felt her chest tighten, not out of fear but pity. Yet pity was dangerous here. The manager hated when people like that lingered too long. Before she could move, a voice barked from the kitchen doorway. "Maya, handle it. We don't need trouble." She wiped her hands on her apron, inhaled deeply, and approached the man. "Sir," she began softly, "can I help you?" The man looked up. His eyes startled her, sharp, intelligent, yet tired in a way that spoke of too many winters spent outside. "I just need a coffee," he said quietly. "Black. No sugar." His voice was rough but gentle, the kind of voice that had once spoken confidently, maybe in boardrooms or classrooms. There was something dignified beneath the dirt. Maya glanced toward the manager, who was watching like a hawk. She hesitated. Then, against her better judgment, she nodded. "Of course. Have a seat. I'll bring it to you." He shuffled to a corner booth near the window, sitting with care as if afraid to break the chair. Maya prepared the coffee quickly, ignoring the whispered comments from customers nearby. When she placed the cup before him, he looked up again. "Thank you," he said, his tone sincere, almost too polite for someone who probably hadn't eaten properly in days. "You're welcome," she murmured. "Do you want something to eat? We have bagels, muffins." But before she could finish, a shrill voice sliced through the air. "Maya, what are you doing?" The manager, Paula, marched over, hands on hips. Her red lipstick looked too bright against the cafe's warm lighting. "You know the policy. We can't serve people who, well, look like that. It drives customers away." A silence spread through the cafe. Every conversation stopped. The man's eyes dropped to his coffee. Maya felt her face flush hot. "He's just having a cup of coffee," she said softly. Paula scoffed. "That coffee's not paid for." She turned to the man, her tone sharp. "Sir, if you don't have money, you need to leave. Now." For a moment, the man didn't move. Then, slowly, he reached into his coat pocket. The motion made Paula take a half step back, a reflex of fear, and someone near the counter whispered, "Is he?" But when his hand emerged, it wasn't holding anything dangerous. It held a wallet. Old, scuffed leather, but unmistakably real. He opened it with deliberate care. Inside were several crisp bills and, oddly, a small, worn photograph tucked behind a transparent sleeve. He placed a 20 on the table. Keep the change, he said quietly. Paula blinked, her mouth slightly open. Maya felt something twist in her chest. Shame, anger, curiosity. Paula stammered, I didn't mean. The man didn't answer. Instead, he lifted the cup, took a slow sip, and looked out the window as if the entire room no longer existed. For several moments, the cafe stood frozen. Then Paula turned on her heel and walked away, muttering something about misunderstandings. Maya lingered, uncertain. The man's hand brushed the photograph in his wallet again. Maya caught a glimpse of it, a faded picture of a young girl with curly hair, smiling beside a bicycle. The edges were worn, as if it had been held countless times over the years. Beautiful, she said softly. Your daughter. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something break in his expression. A flicker of grief that had nowhere left to go. Yes, he whispered. She would have been 25 this year. Maya didn't know what to say. Before she could speak, he tucked the photograph away and stood. Thank you for the coffee, he said, voice steady now. Wait, sir, she started. But he was already walking toward the door. He paused under the frame, turning slightly. You're kind, he said. That matters more than you think. And with that, he stepped into the gray drizzle, disappearing into the blur of the city. Maya stood by the window long after he left, watching the street until the rain swallowed his figure completely. Something about him clung to her, the contradiction of who he appeared to be and the quiet dignity he carried. When she turned back to clean the table, her heart skipped. The wallet was still there. She froze. It lay open, and inside, beside the photograph, something else caught her eye, a folded piece of paper. She hesitated, then picked it up gently. It was a bank check, old but still valid. The name on it made her gasp. Michael R. Henderson. She knew that name. Everyone in Mapleview did. Henderson Industries, one of the biggest companies in the region, thought to have gone bankrupt after the founder mysteriously vanished years ago. Her hands trembled. Could it be the same man? Maya looked toward the door again, heart pounding. Outside, the rain fell harder, and the city's noise blurred into a low hum. She didn't know what to do. Return it? Chase him? Call someone? But deep down, she knew this wasn't over. Because a man who'd once owned half the city had just walked out of her cafe, unrecognized and forgotten, leaving behind a secret that could change everything. And somewhere, between pity and wonder, Maya made a silent promise to find him again. Whatever his story was, she needed to know. The morning rush continued, but to Maya, the world felt different now. The smell of coffee was sharper. The chatter around her felt distant. The name Michael R. Henderson echoed in her mind like a door half opened, daring her to step through. She didn't yet realize that in following that door, her own life would change, in ways neither of them could imagine. The next morning, Mapleview woke beneath a blanket of fog. The streets were damp from the night's rain, puddles reflecting the hazy glow of street lamps. Inside the cafe, Maya poured coffee with a distracted rhythm, her mind far from the clinking cups and murmured orders. The wallet sat in her locker, wrapped in a napkin like something sacred and dangerous. All night she hadn't slept. She'd Googled the name Michael R. Henderson. The search results read like a legend gone wrong. CEO and founder of Henderson Industries, disappeared mysteriously in 2004. Company declared bankrupt 6 months later. Rumors of financial scandal and personal tragedy. No confirmed sightings since. The few available photos showed a man in his 40s, dressed sharply, confidence radiating from his expression. But time had blurred those features, softened them into the weary face she'd seen yesterday. Maya sat in the break room during her short pause, staring at the faded photograph of the little girl she'd taken from the wallet before carefully putting it back. Her smile haunted Maya. The man's voice echoed. She would have been 25 this year. The girl in the photo couldn't have been more than 7 or 8. That would mean she died or vanished around the time Michael Henderson disappeared. Her phone buzzed. A message from her roommate, Jess. Still up late reading detective stuff? You okay? Maya smiled faintly. Jess knew her too well. But this wasn't just curiosity. It felt personal. Something about the quiet dignity in that man's eyes had lodged itself under her skin. She'd seen dozens of people come and go through the café, entitled, impatient, kind, cruel. But this man, he carried a silence that weighed more than any words. By mid-afternoon, Maya made a decision. She took her break early, wrapped her coat around her, and stepped out into the cold. She had a name, a city, and one photograph. It was enough to start with. The public library of Mapleview was nearly empty. Dust motes floated lazily through beams of pale light as she logged onto an old desktop computer. She typed Michael R. Henderson Mapleview 2004 into the search bar and began scrolling. Old news articles appeared, their headlines screaming from another time. Business tycoon's sudden disappearance stuns Mapleview. Tragedy behind Henderson Industries' collapse. Family loss may have driven Henderson to brink. Maya clicked the third one. The article was short, buried in the archives. It mentioned that Henderson's daughter, Emily, had been struck by a drunk driver in late 2003. She died instantly. His wife, unable to cope with the loss, left him months later. Within a year, Henderson had vanished completely. Maya leaned back in the chair, heart heavy. The photograph, the way he'd said, she would have been 25 this year. It made sense now, but there was something else. The article ended with a single line that stuck with her. Police found no evidence of foul play. Henderson's bank accounts were emptied 2 days before he vanished. Emptied? By whom? Her fingers drummed against the desk. The man she'd met didn't look like someone who'd squandered millions. He looked like someone who'd lost everything but still carried the memory of it all. That evening, she returned to the café. The smell of baked bread and espresso wrapped around her like a blanket. Familiar yet different now that she knew the secret behind yesterday's stranger. She glanced toward the corner booth, the one where he'd sat. It was empty, but she could still see the ghost of his presence there. The half-empty cup, the quiet dignity, the way people had stared at him like he was invisible. Paula, the manager, was counting the till. "Hey," Maya said, her tone cautious. "That man from yesterday. Did you notice which direction he went when he left?" Paula frowned. "Why? You think he's coming back?" "I just need to return something he left behind." Paula sighed. "He went toward the park, I think." "Why bother, Maya? People like that don't usually come back." Maya didn't answer. She just untied her apron and slipped outside. The air in Mapleview Park was crisp. The sun was sinking behind the old oak trees, scattering golden light across wet benches. Children's laughter echoed faintly in the distance, and pigeons pecked lazily at breadcrumbs. She walked slowly, scanning faces. An old man feeding birds, a mother pushing a stroller, a jogger passing by. Then, near the fountain, she saw him. Michael Henderson sat on a bench, coat buttoned up, eyes fixed on the rippling water. His hands rested on his knees, and beside him was a paper cup half filled with coins. Maya hesitated. Then, with quiet resolve, she approached. "Mr. Henderson?" she said softly. He turned, eyes narrowing for a moment, then softening in recognition. "You found me," he said. "Did I leave something behind?" She held out the wallet. "I didn't look through it much," she added truthfully. "Just saw the photo. I'm sorry." He took it gently, nodding. "You're honest. That's rare." Maya sat beside him, unsure what to say next. The fountain gurgled between them. After a moment, she asked, "Why are you out here? You had everything once." A sad smile tugged at his lips. "I thought I did. But everything I built was for them, my wife, my little girl. When they were gone, the house felt like a museum. Every chair, every photograph, haunted me." He paused, watching a leaf spin in the water. "When Emily died, I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. One night I drove to the edge of town, parked near the river and just kept walking. I wanted to disappear. So I did." Maya swallowed hard. "And your company?" He laughed quietly, a sound full of regret. "They were waiting. Partners, investors, vultures. The moment I vanished, they carved it up. I didn't even fight. I thought money couldn't fix what I'd lost. There was silence between them, the kind that hums with meaning. Finally, Maya asked, "Then why come to my cafe yesterday?" He looked at her, really looked at her, and said, "Because it used to be mine." Maya blinked. "What?" "The cafe," he said, nodding toward the street beyond the park. "That was one of my first buildings. I sold it before I disappeared. Funny how life circles back. Isn't it?" Her breath caught. "And the photograph?" He smiled faintly, eyes distant. "It's all I have left of her." They sat in silence again, the fountain whispering behind them. Then Michael reached into his coat and pulled something from an inner pocket. A small, square envelope, slightly crumpled. "Here," he said. "I meant to give this to someone yesterday, but maybe you were meant to find it instead." She opened it cautiously. Inside was a folded check, not for money, but for ownership. The paper read, "Transfer of full ownership, Mapleview Cafe." Her eyes widened. What is this?" He smiled, the sadness in his face softening into peace. "It's a gift, for someone who didn't look away." Maya shook her head, stunned. I can't accept this." "Why me?" He stood slowly, shoulders squared despite the wear of years. "Because kindness is the only real investment that never fails." And with that, he turned and walked away, his silhouette dissolving into the evening fog. That night, Maya sat alone in her small apartment, the document spread out before her. Just stared at it, jaw dropped. "You're telling me that homeless man is Michael Henderson? The billionaire who disappeared?" Maya nodded silently. Jess laughed in disbelief. "And he just gave you the cafe?" Maya didn't answer. She was staring at the photograph again, the little girl's smile, frozen in time. For some reason, tears welled in her eyes. She didn't know why he'd chosen her. Maybe because she'd seen him not as a ghost, but as a man. Maybe because compassion had been the one thing left to remind him that he was still human. Either way, she knew one thing for sure: tomorrow, she would go back to the cafe. Not as an employee, but as its new owner. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the cafe's wide front windows, painting soft golden patches on the wooden floor. It was the same cafe, yet somehow it didn't feel like it. Maya stood behind the counter, heart hammering. On the counter lay a manila envelope, the ownership document Michael had given her. She'd reread it a dozen times, tracing the faded ink of his signature like someone touching a sacred relic. It was all real. The cafe buzzed with the usual morning rhythm. Chatter, coffee steam, hurried footsteps. But to Maya, everything felt sharper. The hiss of the espresso machine, the laughter of customers, the sunlight glinting off the metal counter. Every detail pulsed with new meaning. Jess leaned over from the register, whispering, "Are you seriously going through with this?" Maya nodded. "I am. But what if it's a scam? What if that guy wasn't who you think he is?" Maya hesitated. That thought had haunted her all night. Yet something deep inside, instinct, faith, maybe both, told her Michael Henderson hadn't lied. She picked up her phone, scrolling through the photos she'd taken of the ownership document. The signature matched perfectly with those she'd seen in old online archives. There was no doubt. Michael R. Henderson was alive, and he'd just given her his cafe. That afternoon, Maya visited a local notary office. A modest, paper-filled space with humming fluorescent lights. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with reading glasses, squinted at the papers. "This is extraordinary," she murmured. "This signature is legally valid. You'll just need to register it with the city to finalize ownership." Maya exhaled shakily. It was real. All of it. When she stepped outside, the cool autumn air felt different, lighter. Somehow, as if the whole world had opened a door for her. She looked across the street and half expected to see Michael sitting on a bench again, watching quietly. But he wasn't there. Still, she had the strange feeling he was nearby, somewhere in the city, unseen but watching. 2 days later, the cafe was unusually busy. News traveled fast in Mapleview, and rumors were spreading. "Paula, the former manager, had overheard Maya's conversation with the clerk and started whispering to customers. They say the cafe's under new ownership. Did you hear? That young waitress owns the place now. Some mysterious investor signed it over to her. Maya tried to stay calm. She didn't want attention. She just wanted to keep the promise she'd made silently that morning. To run this cafe the way it was meant to be run. With kindness. She introduced a pay-it-forward jar. Anyone could donate a few dollars to cover coffee for someone who couldn't afford it. Within a day, it was half full. By the end of the week, strangers were buying meals for people they'd never met. The energy in the cafe changed. It became human again. Still, every time the doorbell chimed, Maya found herself glancing up, half expecting Michael to return. But he didn't, until one evening. The day had dimmed into twilight. The last customers were leaving. Maya was wiping down the counter when the bell above the door jingled softly. She looked up and froze. He stood there, the same weary coat, the same calm eyes, but cleaner now, his posture straighter. His beard was trimmed, and though his clothes were still plain, there was a quiet strength about him that hadn't been there before. "Mr. Henderson," she breathed. He smiled faintly. "You kept it open." "I did," she said, setting down the cloth. "I didn't know if I'd ever see you again." He stepped closer, the soft glow of the cafe lights falling over his face. "I needed time," he said quietly. "After so many years pretending to be invisible, it's hard to step back into the world." Maya nodded slowly. "You don't have to hide anymore." He studied her for a moment, eyes glinting. "You know, when I gave you that cafe, I thought it was just a gesture. Something symbolic, a way to close my past. But I came by the other day, sat outside, watched you run it." Her cheeks flushed. "You did." He smiled. "You changed it, Maya. People come here now because it feels like home. That's what I'd always hoped this place would be. Before I lost sight of everything that mattered." She swallowed hard. "It's because of you. You gave me a chance." He shook his head gently. "No, you gave me one. You reminded me that kindness still exists." The silence that followed was soft, full of meaning. Finally, he said, "There's something else I need to do." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small velvet box. For a split second, Maya's breath caught. But when he opened it, she saw not jewelry, but a gold locket. Inside, a tiny photograph, the same little girl, Emily. "I carried this for 18 years, he said. "But I think it's time she comes home." Maya frowned slightly. "Home?" He looked around the cafe. "This was the last place she and I came together. She used to sit by that window drinking hot chocolate with whipped cream. She said this cafe smelled like happiness." His voice trembled on the last word. He walked to the window seat and placed the locket carefully on the sill, sunlight catching its surface. For a moment, it glowed faintly, reflecting in the glass. Then he stepped back. Maya blinked away tears. "She'd be proud of you." He nodded slowly. "And of you, too." The next morning, the story broke. A local journalist, having recognized Michael Henderson walking out of the cafe, published a front-page article. "Missing businessman Michael Henderson found alive. Gifted cafe to waitress who showed him kindness." The photo accompanying it showed Maya behind the counter. Unaware the camera had caught her mid-smile, sunlight streaming through the window behind her. The story went viral within days. Reporters arrived, customers poured in, and people across the city started talking about second chances and compassion. When one journalist asked Maya, "Why do you think he chose you?" she simply smiled and said, "Because everyone deserves to be seen, even when the world has forgotten them." Weeks later, on a chilly November afternoon, Maya stood outside the cafe, a new sign freshly hung above the door. Emily's Place. She'd named it after his daughter. Inside, a corner table remained permanently reserved, a small brass plaque reading, "In loving memory of Emily Henderson." Her smile still lives here. Michael visited often now, always sitting by that window, sipping coffee quietly, eyes brighter than before. Sometimes he'd help Maya balance the books, still sharp with numbers and strategy. Other times, He'd just watch customers laugh, talk, and share meals, as if witnessing life resume where he'd once paused it. One evening, as the cafe closed, he stood to leave and said, "You know, Maya, when you handed me that cup of coffee the first day, I hadn't spoken to another person in almost a month. You didn't see a ghost. You saw a man." She smiled softly. "Maybe because I know what it's like to be invisible, too." He nodded thoughtfully. "Then promise me something. Keep this place alive. Not for profit, but for people." "I promise." He smiled, eyes distant but peaceful. "Then I think Emily would approve." Later that night, Maya stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker outside. The golden locket still rested on the sill, catching the glow of the cafe sign outside. For a moment, she could almost hear a child's laughter, faint, echoing through time. She closed her eyes and whispered, "You're home now." The wind rustled gently through the doorway, carrying the scent of rain and coffee and something else, something like grace. And in that small cafe, two souls who had once been lost had finally found their way back to the world.